I actually had a confrontation with one of these things when I was a working police officer, and I was on duty one night in '78 when me and a colleague actually had a confrontation with one of these things.
Where was this?
This was Connolly near Skipton in North Yorkshire, and I was driving a police car, he was the observer, and we came round a bend in a country lane, and there was this thing sitting in the air in front of us, and it was absolutely stunning to see. It was a huge disc, about 100 feet in diameter, had a dome on the top of it, with what appeared to be portals, darkened portals around the dome. It had a skirting around the underside and coloured flashing lights which were flashing on and off, almost like a neon sign effect. And there was 3 large globes or balls protruding from the underside. They were spaced evenly on the underside. I stopped the car and we got out. There was a very, very heavy static had come on the police car radio at that time. I don't know the cause of it. It may have been because of this thing was there, but it wouldn't be right to jump to conclusion. But this static suddenly set up on the radio, and I got out of the car, both of us did, and we stood there sort of open mouth looking at this thing as it slowly moved away from us. But despite its enormous size, there was no sound coming from the damn thing. The only sound that we heard at that time was where it was displaced in the air when it started to move away from us. And the thing was, though, it was absolutely beautiful to look at. I couldn't help remembering at the time, thinking, what kind of engineers put something like this together? Because it was absolutely extraordinary, it was. And that's what got me into the thing, because I was determined I was going to find out. I mean, I'd not long been out of the RAF, and my last postings, I'd been on Air Force bases where they were testing the very latest technology in aircraft. And at that time, the aircraft of the time, which were under test, were the Lightning, because it was a Lightning station when I was on, and the Canberra. And that was our most advanced technology at the time. They were only testing them at that time, they test flying them. Now this thing was years and years and years ahead of anything like that. It was no question about it at all. It was something that we hadn't got, and I knew it from the moment I saw it.
Tony, you've now become a fully fledged and widely respected UFO investigator in your own right, but would it be fair to say that your initial broad interest in the UFO subject has focused on 2 specific areas? I'm thinking particularly about your recent work in abductions and animal mutilations. What is it about these 2 areas that attracts your interest?
Well, let's be, in the first instance, when I got involved in this business, I had no idea it was going to take me in the direction it did. I've mainly been governed by instances which have come to my notice. And the abduction side of it was when somebody came to me, once again as a policeman, and said that they'd been chased by a helicopter some years ago, and the end product was that they'd ended up with missing time, and they were complaining about the low flying of this helicopter. Well, of course, I checked on this as a policeman and found there was no helicopters, of course, flying at this particular time, and they certainly wouldn't be flying in that location at night because of low, high voltage wire low over the roads. That took me into the abduction side of things. And as things developed, you tend to go, it's like the branches of a tree. You go up the main trunk with your normal UFO work, and you're suddenly led in different directions. All sorts of things are associated with this, as you well know. The animal mutilation started to come into the picture when they were starting to get high concentrations of UFOs in specific areas, and then within very, very short time people were finding animals killed and mutilated in very strange ways. And that is when I started to focus on this as possibly linked to the UFO phenomenon. As with the abduction case, the first case I ever dealt with, when this was looked in at great length, it turned out, of course, eventually hypnosis was used to try to recover the missing time of this individual. And we got the classic answers from this person. There's no doubt about it being an abduction involved. And it all went from that particular direction.
Now, skeptics and debunkers, of course, would continue to maintain that all such accounts of so-called alien abductions are foolish nonsense. How would you counter these?
Well, first of all, it was the skeptics and debunkers that said that the world was flat for 300 years, despite some of the top scientists of the time saying it was round. It's very, very easy for a skeptic or debunker to turn around and say to people who've done years and years of research, this is absolute rubbish. It's very, very easy. This is what they do all the time. And of course, when we say, well, you prove to me that what I'm saying is rubbish, and they will turn around and say, well, it's not for us to prove that you're right. It's not for us to prove that you're wrong. It's for you to prove that you're right. And so we're always going to be faced with this thing, and as much information as you put before these people, they will do their best to pull it to pieces. But the facts are the facts. Particularly if we talk about things like alien abductions, where there's such a wide variety of people being involved in this, and I'm talking about highly intelligent people, and a great many who know nothing whatsoever about the subject. We're getting them all over the world, as you well know. People who are very, very backward, are not in touch with the media and things like that, and they're telling the same stories. Now, is everybody imagining things? Is everybody making these things up? What have they to gain, particularly these sort of backward countries, by saying things like this? But that is not the point. It's the facts that point to abduction, and there are so many, many facts which are occurring repeatedly, which I'm absolutely convinced they're taking place.
It's just those eyes, they're so awful, they're so cold.
Yes. Nothing's going to hurt you, there's nothing to be frightened of.
There is no emotion, there is nothing in those eyes at all.
What are the eyes like?
Like almond shaped, but they're just like a bug eye. There's no middle, there's nothing like it, and they're just cold. And they're all around me now.
Yeah.
There's about 3 or 4, and they are absolutely determined, no matter how much I protest now for myself, they've got to carry on. There's some blood on a tool of some sort, but I just don't seem to be able to see where it's coming from.
Can you describe the tool? What does it look like?
One's got a probe now, and I know, I understand this time what they're saying, and there seems to be great excitement in the fact that I've had hysterectomy. Goodness only knows why, and that they're all coming together now, and they're so interested in what has happened there, and the whys and the wherefores, and these 3 seem to have spoken to this one, and it's up to this one to get the probe, and I see this probe. Oh.
Yes, they're not going to hurt you.
The next thing is that this probe goes in my navel, and it hurts so much.
Yes.
And I'm screaming, I'm begging, for God's sake, you're causing me so much pain.
Uh-huh. Yes.
And at this point, I beg them, but they don't stop, they just carry on. It's just as if they've got a job to do, and it's as if they don't hear or they don't want to hear, but they carry on.
What sort of background do these people have?
Once again, a wide background. They come from all sorts of different backgrounds. As I say, you can go from the office worker, the shop worker, to somebody who's a company director, to somebody who works in a high level position for the Ministry of Defence, people who are actually in the military. You name it, they're all involved.
Now, lately you've been investigating and reporting on numerous accounts of strange, some might say bizarre, animal mutilation deaths. When did you first come across these, and where precisely?
Well, they're certainly bizarre, that's for sure. Many years ago, I'd been monitoring it was basically, again, UFOs. We were getting concentrations of UFO reports. We were focusing on the UFOs. And then it seemed to transpire that when these UFOs had been in the area, people started to find these mutilated animals. So I started to look much deeper into this. And then it went from one thing to another. It started off mainly up in the Highlands of Scotland, where they started to find large numbers of seals dead on the beaches, minus their heads. Their heads being surgically removed. And I spoke to the police up there. I spoke to the veterinaries who did the autopsies on these bodies, and everybody was baffled. On one occasion, they found 40 seals dead on a beach, a dry beach. And the vet said every one of the seals had had their head removed in a very precise surgical manner. In fact, every head had been cut off, and the actual knife or whatever instrument was used cut between the same vertebra on every animal. And the thing that was very predominant in all these cases was that there was a total blood loss from the bodies. When I say blood loss, the blood had apparently disappeared from the carcasses. There was never any sign of blood on the ground, like with the seals. There was no sign of any blood on the beaches. There was no sign of any blood on the ground where the animals had been killed. They had a hole in their head, and it appeared that the blood had been drained out of the bodies through this hole until the carcasses were totally dry of blood. But also the brain and spinal cord was missing from some of these animals through a very, very small hole. And just that fact alone made the vets say, well, how can something do something like this? Now, the interesting thing is that the one common factor with these things is the fact that there was always some form of strange aerial activity being seen taking place in the areas where these things were happening. Obviously, this is what drew me towards it. Now, there was all sorts of things. There was one where 40 pigs were killed in one field overnight. But what I started to look at, we don't just look straight at these things, trying to sort of work out what is behind it. And what we were finding, there were large numbers of animals being found in very concentrated areas, i.e. in a space of 50 feet on one incident. There was several sheep dead, there were foxes dead, there was two dead deer and a dead donkey, all in very, very close proximity to each other. Now, if you look at this closer, you find that these animals would normally not be seen anywhere in the vicinity of each other. They all have their own type of territory, but yet they were all in this very close area, all dead. That then implied that whatever it was that was killing these animals was actually taking from their normal habitat, doing what they do to them, and then placing them all back on the ground in one lump. In other words, they were taking a cross-section of animals, doing these things to them, and then dumping them all in the same place. I think the breakthrough from my point of view came not very long ago, certainly less than 12 months ago, when a chap was driving a vehicle over a very remote moor over near Whitby. In the dead of night, he was on his way back home. He had one of these breakdown trucks. No, it wasn't. He had been delivering scrap metal, and he was on his way back with his vehicle. And suddenly, as he was driving across the moor top, he's confronted with these blinding lights coming towards him on the road. He got so frightened because of this, he thought this vehicle was going to crash into him. He actually pulled off the side of the road to allow it to get past. This thing shot past him, and then when it had gone past, of course, he pulls back onto the road and starts to drive. But he'd only gone 50 or 60 feet further down the road, and he had to stop again because there were all the dead animals lying in the road. On this occasion, there was a dead donkey, there were dead deer, dead sheep, dead foxes, all lying in the middle of the road, and he couldn't get past. He actually had to tie an anchor, a rope from his vehicle onto the donkey and some of the deer, and tow them up to the side of the road to enable him to get past. Now, work it out for yourself. If something like that's happened, how has that vehicle coming the other way passed along that road? And I am totally convinced now that this thing wasn't on the road surface, probably just above the road surface after initially dumping these things and then shooting away.
Following on from that, some form of predator might be at work here and responsible for these horrendous mutilations. What are we to make of this?
I honestly and truly believe, and I've gone into this animal mutilation in great depth, believe me, I honestly believe that there is a predator out there. But I believe
more than one?
Oh, difficult to say, but I mean, if it's covering us on a global basis as it is, I would certainly suggest there's more than one, because it's happening all over the world. But the thing is, when I say predator, I don't think it's a predator by any concept we understand. I think this is something, when we tend to talk alien, I think this is alien to anything we really understand. It might be something which travels in the invisibility zone. Let's be right, there are things that we can't see, i.e. we can't see infrared, but it's there. These things may travel in these zones. They may be invisible to the naked eye, they may come and do what they do, and we aren't going to see them if they're there anyway. We just don't know. The $64,000 question is, why are they doing it? And I know there have been various reports from various parts of the world that it's just possible that it could have involved odd humans here and there, but I'm not going to go into that.
Finally, there are people probably watching this interview and wondering, is this man for real? Are UFOs real? If you could look at that person right now, what would you say?
I would say, first of all, seek and you will find.